So I've always had a rule on my show, basically. I have opinions, and you can have opinion on my opinion. But I'm not going to have an opinion on your opinion on my opinion. I'll make an exception because I think this is instructive. So I said the other day, I said, Micah Parsons is a stud athlete, but through the years, this summer I had a conversation with a general manager, and he said, don't be surprised if Dallas moves off him, even though he's in his prime, because he's not a versatile player. He's a great athlete and a great player, and he's going to be a Hall of Famer. But the Cowboys tried to use him at linebacker, and it didn't work. He doesn't have fast eyes. He's one of those classic. Hassan Reddick was this. He's a much better player than Hassan Reddick. See quarterback, go get him. See ball, go get it. There's no knock on that. He's a world-class athlete. Well, he didn't like when I said that. He put up a tweet yesterday, said, hey, we just held Saquon Barkley to 60 rushing yards. Our only losses have been holding teams to 13 points. Man, sometimes can y'all please just blankety blank? Stop giving people mics or listening to trash. So let me just say this about your great job against Saquon Barkley. 7 of 9 Philadelphia Eagle games this year, Saquon Barkley has rushed for 60 yards or less. The Dallas Cowboys held him to 60 yards. The Eagles can't run the football this year. That wasn't great defense. That is the inability due to injuries and other reasons. Philly can't run the ball this year. That's why they're not as dominant. That was not a great Packer performance. It was a consistent Eagles run game performance. So the Cowboys defense last year with Micah, 31st. The Cowboys defense this year without Micah, 31st. And again, but the argument here isn't about who's right, me or Micah. This is instructive. There are certain players in the NFL, very, very infrequent professional athletes that do a bunch of stuff well. Wemby, ball handle, hit a three, block a shot, post move. Jokic can do everything. Best passer on the Nuggets. Best post guy on the Nuggets. Best rebounder mostly on the Nuggets. Best shooter at times on the Nuggets. That is rare. Ohtani can do everything. Most baseball players, the great ones, are Freddie Freeman. Man, can he hit. Ohtani can do everything. Jokic and Wemby are versatile. Luka's a great scorer. Carmelo Anthony was a great scorer. He wasn't a great playmaker, a great defender, a great rebounder. Melo and Luka are great scorers. And that, for great players, even great players, that's it. Christian McCaffrey's a versatile player. Bijan Robinson's a versatile player. Adrian Peterson was just a great running back. Micah is essentially Tyreek Hill. For the record, both traded in their prime. Tyreek Hill's never been a great blocker. He doesn't run great routes, but he'll probably make the Hall of Fame because, man, he is great with a deep ball. But Andy Reid moved off him.
Let's have a real conversation about team building, player value, and how we evaluate performance in the NFL. There's a specific narrative I want to tackle head-on, one that seems to be gaining traction, and I believe it requires some serious context. First, let's address the elephant in the room, the Kansas City Chiefs' decision to move on from Tyreek Hill. Now, I understand the mechanics of that choice. Managing a salary cap and constructing a roster is an incredibly complex puzzle. Sometimes, you have to make difficult financial decisions for the long-term health of the franchise. I get it. However, we cannot let that practical reality morph into a false narrative. We must be unequivocally clear about one fundamental truth. Patrick Mahomes, as transcendent as he is, would still benefit from having a weapon of Tyreek Hill's caliber. Andy Reid's offensive play calling would be exponentially more versatile and potent. To suggest otherwise is to ignore the basic principles of football. A quarterback of that magnitude, paired with a coach of that genius, becomes even more dangerous when you add a human cheat code who can score from anywhere on the field. Now, this is where we need to apply some critical thinking. The fact that the Chiefs have continued to win, and win big, without Hill is not a universal argument for getting rid of elite talent. It is a testament to a truly exceptional set of circumstances. We are witnessing one of the greatest head coach-quarterback partnerships in the history of the sport, coupled with a defensive coordinator in Steve Spagnuolo, who has built a unit that is nothing short of legendary. They are the exception, not the rule. Using their success as a blanket justification for why any team can easily replace a top 5 wide receiver is a logical fallacy. It's like saying, Well, this Olympic champion can run faster than anyone, even with a slight ankle sprain, so ankle sprains aren't a big deal for runners. Let's bring some perspective back into the conversation. To truly understand the impact of a player like Hill, look at the Chiefs' offensive output during his tenure. Their most explosive, statistically dominant, and frankly terrifying offensive years were from 2018 through 2021. Were they successful in 2022? Absolutely. They won the Super Bowl. But anyone who watched that season closely, and even prominent analysts like Nick Wright have acknowledged this, saw an offense that often relied on a dink-and-dunk approach. They mastered the short passing game and relied heavily on yards after the catch. It was a masterclass in adaptation from Reed and Mahomes, but let's not pretend it was the same offensive juggernaut. It was a different, more methodical beast. Using that season as the reference point for life without Hill is intellectually dishonest. The reference point should be the peak of their powers, which undeniably featured him. This brings me to a larger point about how we dissect games, specifically the recent performance of the Green Bay Packers defense against the Philadelphia Eagles. There seems to be an effort to downplay what the Packers accomplished, and I think we need to set the record straight. Yes, I agree that holding running back Saquon Barkley to under 60 yards rushing isn't, in isolation, a monumental statement. The Eagles' offensive line has been a mess, with key players like Lane Johnson in and out of the lineup, and their ground game has struggled consistently this season. Furthermore, if you look at the total scrimmage yards, Barkley still managed to accumulate nearly 100 total yards when you factor in his receptions, including that notable spin move catch and run. However, and this is a crucial however, we cannot let those contextual factors completely overshadow the sheer dominance of the Packers' defensive unit. That defense was elite. It was great. It was, for large stretches of that game, absolutely special. To downplay their overall impact on the outcome of that contest is a mistake. I watched that entire game live, and the single biggest takeaway that I kept repeating was the Packers' defensive intensity. It was through the roof. This wasn't just another regular season game for them. They played with a level of focus and ferocity that you typically see in a playoff elimination game. The energy literally jumped off the screen. It was so palpable it was giving me anxiety as a neutral observer. I found myself wondering, is there some playoff implication here that I'm missing? Why is this so intense? They deserve a massive amount of credit for that mindset and for the execution that followed. Take, for instance, the knockout punch hit on Jalen Hurts that caused a crucial turnover. That was not a fluke. That was a defensive unit playing at a fever pitch, understanding the moment and making a game-changing play. That play alone took points off the board for the Eagles. At a minimum, Philadelphia was in position for a field goal, and it very well could have been a touchdown given their field position and momentum. That is a monumental swing in a tightly contested game. Throughout the entire contest, Jalen Hurts was consistently flushed from the pocket. He was forced to make plays with his legs, whether scrambling for positive yardage or buying time to attempt a throw. The Packers' defensive front made life utterly miserable for him. They presented a brutal, unrelenting challenge. What we saw from that unit was the definition of an elite defensive performance. I've been consistent on this point since last year's playoffs. The Green Bay Packers presented the toughest defensive challenge the Philadelphia Eagles faced throughout their entire postseason run. It wasn't even a question. My argument then, as it is now, was that while the Eagles had their injury issues, the primary reason that game was so close was the Packers' defense. Jalen Hurts and the Eagles won that game because, in that specific moment, Hurts was an elite game manager. He took care of the ball, made the safe, smart plays, and did just enough. Conversely, we saw Jordan Love's inability to manage the game perfectly, with a couple of forced throws and turnovers proving costly. That playoff game was a front-row seat to a fundamental truth about winning in the NFL. Sometimes you need your quarterback to be a superhero, and sometimes you just need him to be a smart, efficient steward of the game. The Packers' defense was so good that it forced the Eagles into the latter category. I did an entire film breakdown after that game because everyone was asking, what's wrong with the Eagles' offense? The answer, clear as day on the tape, was that the Packers' coverage was so tight that no one was getting open. The Eagles' big plays came from off-script scrambles or phenomenal individual efforts, like the Devontae Smith touchdown, which was a spectacular throw and an even better catch. Now, is the Eagles' offense currently operating at the same peak level we saw during their Super Bowl run? No, it is not. They are not firing on all cylinders. That is a separate but true statement. But that fact does not invalidate the dominant performance of the Packers' defense. Multiple truths can exist simultaneously. The Eagles' offense has issues, and the Packers' defense is a formidable, elite unit. This isn't an either-or scenario. We can hold both of these ideas in our hands at the same time. This leads me to a final, related point about expectations. The conversation around individual defensive players like Micah Parsons often lacks this nuance. The impact of a single defensive player, no matter how great, is inherently limited compared to a quarterback. Their influence is felt in pressures, in key stops, and in game-changing plays. A player like Parsons can be the reason a team wins a crucial divisional game, which can have massive consequences for playoff seeding and division titles. But to expect a defensive player to single-handedly transform every game is to misunderstand the sport. The story of a game is rarely about one defensive player. It's about the collective unit. So let's bring this all together. We need to have more layered conversations. We need to acknowledge that the Chiefs' success without Hill is a unique case, not a blueprint. We need to give the Green Bay Packers defense its well-earned credit for a phenomenal performance, without letting the Eagles' current struggles completely cloud that judgment. And we need to understand that in the complex ecosystem of an NFL game, 8 or 9 different things can be true at once. I'm incredibly interested in your perspective on all of this. This is the kind of dialogue that makes analyzing football so rewarding. Do you believe the Packers' defense is being undervalued in the national conversation? How much weight do you give to the Chiefs' model of team building? Let me know your detailed thoughts in the comments below. I read every single comment, and whether you agree with me or have a completely different take, I want to hear it. Let's get into some great discussions. Let's debate the details. But ultimately, let's have fun exploring the complexities of this game we all love. If you enjoy this kind of in-depth, nuanced conversation, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a fantastic community here, one that values smart, passionate discussion over easy, hot takes. I want to create a space where we all feel connected and excited to break down the game together. We're well on our way, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. Also, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. It genuinely helps the algorithm share our conversation with more thoughtful fans. Thank you so much for your time and engagement. I'll see you in the comments.